Greetings, peeps, and welcome to the final installment of IHU 101, the podcast. And we are really excited for this final episode because we have the wonderful and talented Dr. Brad Deroche. Very happy and excited to have you here, sir. Thank you so much for being on our podcast. So we're going to get right down to the questions here in just a minute, but I wanted you to maybe tell our viewing audience a little bit about what it is that you do. They know me, obviously, from the podcast and from the vids that I produce for the class. And I have mentioned that Dr. Deroche is a member of the faculty at Delta College, a member of the music faculty. So give us a little rundown of your position.
Yeah, okay. So I am a professor of music at Delta, and I teach guitar classes and music history classes, and used to teach some theory classes. We don't have those right now, but we teach a lot of different things as we have to wear many hats. I've been at Delta. I was hired actually in December of 1989, so I've been there a few years now, and it's a great full-time position. And my specialty is classical guitar, though. And so I try to focus as much as I can in that area. When classes are full, then it's great. So anyway, yeah. And then, so that's my position at Delta. I also am chair of this little music department, which basically means it's some light administrative duties. You have to make schedules and deal with budget and a few things like that. So,
all right.
That's the position.
Okay, so you have been briefed on part of what this man does, and I can speak for my portion of it. We are extraordinarily lucky to have Dr. Deroche on our faculty.
Thank you.
All right, sir. Here we go.
Here we go.
Your questions. Now, this is kind of a low-tech thing, a piece of paper, but the questions are based upon the students' observations of your recital that you had at the Grace Adele Library. And students watched that recital and read your bio, and then these are the questions that they came up with.
Perfect.
So I've grouped them into categories, so we'll start with the first category, which has to do with personal music choices. Would you say that you prefer more emotional, melancholic pieces versus some uplifting and cheery songs?
That's a great question. Wow. I think, I don't know. In terms of programming, I try to program a balance of those so that I don't go too much into dreamy stuff or too much just into fleet-fingered things. And so it is something that I do think about consciously, like I want to balance the program out in that way. As far as my own personal preference, I think it depends on the day. Some days when I'm energetic, probably if I had my second cup of coffee, then it's fast and fiery pieces. I want to play Spanish music and flamenco style. But on other days, I'm more introspective, and I feel like I want to play things that maybe have a deeper emotional impact and more feeling. So it changes on a day-to-day basis, and so it's hard to say that I have a preference for one or the other. Probably depends on mood, but as far as programming goes, I do try to balance those out so that I don't just have an overly syrupy, sappy program with all, completely, tear jerkers or whatever. Sure. But, great question.
Makes sense.
Wow, nice.
All right.
Let's start.
Why do you think you are so drawn to, and I'm going to interject their word here, but you're so drawn to dramatic, lyrical, and virtuosic music?
Wow. You're right. These are great questions, and well written. Man, why am I drawn to that as opposed to maybe simpler styles of music? I guess it's part of it. Probably comes from personal challenge. You want to play things when you're really into something. You start digging further and further, and eventually get to a point to where really simple and really easy things aren't so attractive anymore because they just don't require or demand that much of you. I like virtuosic music because it's demanding, and so there's a challenge to it. I think there's always a little piece of us that wants to challenge ourselves as musicians, because ask any professional musician, they are all trying to grow and improve, no matter what age they are or what status they are. The best players in the world are still trying to improve, you know? And so I think that there's always something for me in me that wants to improve what I do. And so there's that challenge. Can I play this piece of music well, even though it's really difficult to play? And so, but then there's more than just the virtuosic music. You also asked about lyrical music. And that is something that I am drawn to more than music that lacks a lyrical quality. And especially more in recent years. I think as a graduate student, when we're in school, I took on more atonal pieces and complicated 20th or 21st century pieces that other it's musicians' music. One musician plays and one or two other musicians listen to, but the rest of the audience is like, oh, what's that? What are those notes? Is that music? And so lyrical music, I feel like something that has a really beautiful melody, has an ability to draw us in and to really move us. I think that stirs our emotions as much as anything. And so I'm always drawn to beautiful lyrical music, more than quirky, highly rhythmic pieces, let's say.
Sure.
So anyway, long-winded answer there.
No,
That's
that's
not too
great.
much, but-
That's great. So next question, in the same vein, of the three styles, dramatic, lyrical, and virtuosic, which would you say is your favorite to both perform and to listen to? Now I know you kind of alluded to that answer a minute ago, but maybe expand on that a little more.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, I think there's most of those elements in most of the pieces that I play. Music that is dramatic, I feel, and a good example for me would be a piece such as Albéniz's Leyenda, or also known as Asturias. That piece has a really virtuosic first section, which is really fast and sounds like several instruments playing at the same time. But then it's got this really dramatic, lyrical, beautiful middle section in it, which is it's just very beautiful and it's slow. And then it returns to the first section, which is very rapid and fast moving. And that kind of music, to me, I feel like really moves an audience. And so most of what I'm playing is not, I have to like it. I don't want to play music I don't like.
Well, yeah, I can't think of a solitary musician that enjoys it. Yeah, right.
But sometimes we're called upon to play music that we don't really care for, and I think that would be more the case if you're an orchestral musician, for instance. You're like, I don't want to play that piece again. But as a soloist, I'm in charge of what I play, so I can choose whatever I want, and so I do. I like all three of those different things for different reasons, but I think that each one of those things really has a different impact on an audience. And so I'm always trying to find things that are going to, hopefully, pieces that will move the audience.
Sure.
Because I feel like that's my job, it's my mission statement, if you would, is to present a moment of beauty for people.
Right.
And I think that's what we do as classical musicians. It's really different than the entertainment industry, where they are there to entertain people, which is kind of a distraction or a diversion in life, whereas art music and beautiful music that comes from it is more something that draws you in and makes you think and feel, whereas entertainment music is kind of like a distraction from everyday life, and you do other things while you're listening to it.
I hope you all caught his use of the word art music, that phrase. We're the class is humanities through the arts.
Yeah.
And we are taking this. We specifically in my teaching it is through the lens of music. So thank you for
Yeah.
Thank you for putting that in. That qualifier.
Yeah, and I use that term as opposed to classical music most of the time, because classical is it's an unfortunate term that got stuck on
Yes.
art music. And there is a difference between art music and popular music or entertainment music. Sometimes the lines are really blurry and there's gray area, and sometimes they overlap. But for the most part, they're about art, for one, art music, or entertainment.
Sure.
That's a whole different animal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. How did you decide to play this type of music, and did you play other kinds of music before making the decision to go into this type of music?
Yeah. Also, again, good questions. Thanks, folks. Yes, when I first started out as a young person, I started playing guitar when I was 5 or 6. And those were just guitar lessons, guitar and piano as a kid. And it's something that, honestly, people from my generation, everybody kind of took lessons, or most people did. If you were a middle class and up family, you probably took music lessons. And so those were very typical. You learned out of a method book, and you learned Oh Susanna and Home on the Range, and pieces like that. And so that was my beginning. And then as a teenager, I got interested in rock and roll and electric guitar. And so I pursued that for a while, and I was very much into playing that and trying to be the best, most virtuosic player I could be at that time. And I found that the virtuosity was really fascinating to me even at that point in time, playing electric guitar. I wanted to be the fastest player. I wanted to play more technically difficult things. I wanted to know what I was doing in terms of how can I play all the modes properly and so on. And I think at some point that drive to be really good at the instruments and to really know what I was doing in terms of understanding of music behind it, that led me eventually to seeking out art music and wanting to play art music. But I will also say that early on I was very attracted to the sound of a nylon string guitar, a Spanish guitar, and why I don't know. That's actually a really good question to ponder for people. But if you're really attracted to the sound of an instrument, it makes you want to play it every day. And so for me, my personal instruments that I play have to be very attractive sounding. I have to want to play them because I want to love the sound.
Sure.
So anyway, I started out playing rock and roll, and most of the styles of music that I played within rock and roll were more like hard rock music. And that was mostly in the 80s. So yes, my hair was very long, and I played in long rock and roll bands. And you know, we were playing whatever hard rock music was popular in the day. You know, Scorpions and Whitesnake,
Yep.
and Rat and Ozzy Osbourne, etc. Yngwie Malmsteen was one of my specialties, real fast.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome, though.
Yeah, and I think it's a gateway, that very virtuosic electric guitar music. And I will, one last thing on this. I always had in my mind that at some point I was going to leave playing rock and roll and moving to playing classical music. I don't really know why that was, but that was always a thought in my mind that I have to go in this direction, and that what I'm doing now, if it doesn't, like if I wasn't some super successful person like Eddie Van Halen or whatever, that would come to an end, that style of music, and then I would go into classical music. And it just happened in my mid-20s. I'm like, all right, I've taken this as far as I can go. The next step is to move to Hollywood and try and get into some long-haired, I never wore spandex, long-haired band, and go on tour or whatever.
Sure. And
I played constantly. I played 5 nights a week for many years, but just around the area, local pubs and clubs. And I just thought, this isn't a sustainable lifestyle. At some point, young people, as a young person, you finally have to put away things, childhood things or whatever, and become an adult.
Yeah.
So
got to pay the rent.
That's right.
Yeah.
You got it. Yeah, you had to. I needed to have a real job, and I started a family and all that too. So
Sure. All right. Fantastic. So this next set of questions deals directly with the choice of instrument and stylistic practices. Do you only play classical guitar, or are there other instruments that you have learned or like to play as well?
I would say I only play classical guitar now. That's my specialty. I still own a Fender Stratocaster, an electric guitar, but it is in its case, which is in a closet in my house, and honestly, it never sees the light of day. I never play it. I bought it brand new, one of many guitars I owned back then, electric guitars, in 1989 or 1990. And it actually, I had it for a number of years, and then shortly thereafter, I actually quit playing electric guitar and started playing classical guitar, and I sold that guitar to my brother. And then he had it for, I don't know, 6, 8, 10 years, and then he said, hey, do you want this thing? I'm going to sell it. And I thought, yeah, I'll buy it back. And I wasn't playing electric guitar, but I bought it back. And so it's actually kind of been mine or my brother's since it was new. And it just sits in the case. I have no desire to play it, but I keep it because there have been times when, like modern pieces, I played some pieces by a modern composer, Missy Mazzola, and it required electric guitar. And so, you had to do that with effects and so on.
Sure.
So there's been a couple of occasions when I need it.
It's really interesting that you bring up Fender Stratocaster, because our last guest, Eric Ryden, that's his favorite instrument to play, although most of what he plays, because he plays blues guitar, is acoustic guitar.
Oh, yeah.
But his favorite instrument is to play the Fender Strat.
Yeah. They're very versatile instruments.
They are indeed. How long did it take you to find, and this is again related to stylistic practice, how long did it take you to find your style of playing?
I don't know if I ever have found my style of playing. That's a good question. It's a tough one to answer well, though.
Sure.
I don't know that I have a style. I mean, I play other people's compositions, and so I think when you do that, I mean, everybody sounds different. I will say that. So even, if 10 different people play the same composition by Bach or whomever, every person sounds a bit different. And so within that, I suppose, is your style. There are some things I look for as a classical guitarist that might be slightly different than some other people in what they do. And one of the things that I really try hard to do is to sustain my notes, to have a very lyrical quality to my playing. And I choose instruments that help me to do that, and so on. So it's a very different kind of approach to playing than a more Spanish style, where the notes are more percussive, let's say. And so many guitarists have a sound that the notes kind of pop, 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 whereas I try to think of them more as if they're bowed, ba, 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 and so I choose that kind of sound. So I have a darker sound, and I think a more lyrical sound, and that's been my approach to playing. And so if I have a style, I would say it's that I try to play things lyrically and with a lot of legato sounds, as opposed to very staccato or percussive sounds. That's one thing. And then I like to be, and I don't know if I am, but I like to be the informed performer. That's sort of two terms I've married together. So in performing, I try not to just play what feels good.
Sure.
I try to do my research, and so I study the music, and so it's looking at, okay, here's a phrase, there's a cadence there, so I should probably back off a little here and then accelerate on the next phrase, and so on. And so I noticed when I was first starting to play classical guitar that I would play whatever felt good or sounded good to my ear. And then going back and hearing some of those recordings, I was surprised. I'm like, wow, I like that sound, but the phrase didn't really work well there. And so I had to learn to kind of use the combination of the sound that's in my ear, what I think sounds good, with my knowledge of music, and marry those two things together, so you're not just doing one or the other. So it's not a completely academic approach, nor a completely emotional approach where it's lacking in reason. So I try to put those together and become the informed performer, and also keep in mind, what does the composer want? What does music sound like in that style period?
Sure. Would you say, I'm interjecting this question myself, would you say you're still developing your style?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll ever achieve anything that is a style. That's a great question.
It
because
is.
I never really thought about it.
It is.
I don't know what my style is. I sound like me, and whatever that is, good or bad, I
In the
don't
style
know.
of Dr. Brad Deroche. There you go. I think
We're going to see it on license plates soon.
Right. A la Brad Deroche. I like it. How did you know when you found? Now, this question is probably unanswerable, but we'll give it a shot. In fact, I will just go ahead and say I don't think we can really answer this question based upon Brad's previous answer. But the question is, how did you know when you found your specific style? And for me personally, as a musician, I don't know that I will ever find what would be referred to as my style. Now, I don't know.
Yeah, I think the same thing for me. I think there's not. It might be different than what happens in the rock and roll world, and I'll just use an example. If we took someone like Eddie Van Halen, who's pretty well known, or Jimi Hendrix, let's say, people often refer to those players as having a style, but the style is really enveloped in their own compositions. So it's more a compositional style.
Sure.
What they created and what they wrote, what they came up with, because the actual pitches or techniques they used, or sounds that they used, are unique to them.
Right.
So when Eddie Van Halen, for instance, did the two-hand tapping on the guitar neck, that was a unique thing to him. But that's a compositional style more than a style of playing that classical musicians might do.
Well, and then specific to the genre as
yeah.
well.
Oh, yeah. So they sound completely different than B.B. King or whatever,
Right.
you know.
Right.
And so I think it's really hard to say that we have our own style, but I will say the same thing as you, is that I feel like it's always developing and evolving. And I believe that's the constant search, is to, how can I get better at this? How can I dig deeper in the music and find more layers and peel back more layers to understand it better, to present it better, so that
Sure.
an audience will say, oh, that was really, really
Right.
beautiful.
Right.
You don't want to miss the point because composers spend so much time and they have so much knowledge and ability when they're writing, that if we don't take the time to really dig into it and understand it, then we're doing a disservice to the music.
The message is lost.
The message is lost,
Yeah, I would agree.
Garbling the words.
Yes. And yes. Excellent. Some of the pieces you played seem to have very personal meaning to you. Is there a backstory to any of them? So they're talking about the repertoire specifically of this recital.
Again, good questions. I don't know that they have there's not a personal narrative that went into this program. So there's not I didn't go through a great sense of loss, and for instance, and try to find pieces that fit that. As far as them having meaning to me, they all do in some way, because every piece of music has some kind of extra musical narrative that we can either impose on it or the composer meant to have in it. And so when I choose pieces, I look for ones that I can relate to, because there are millions of pieces in the world, and
Right.
you have to choose what you're going to play. So an example, one of the pieces I played was called Capricho Árabe, by a Spanish composer, Francisco Tárrega. And that piece, to me, it's sort of a beautiful story in itself. And so I chose a work like that because, one, I think it's a quality composition for our instruments, and two, it has emotion and meaning that I feel, and I feel like I can maybe translate that to an audience. But it's pretty tough to say that there's in this particular program, there wasn't really a thread that runs through them. I really chose pieces to kind of give a sense of up and down, and if this piece, I started with a fast piece, and then I had a couple of slower pieces, and then another fast one, then a couple slower, and then fast again. So it was more along those lines: happy pieces, sad pieces, happy piece, sad piece, and that was more the programming idea, the thread that ran through. But there are others that I've done where I have a more personal narrative, or something that runs through them. But in this particular program, I was thinking more about what mood people would be in and trying to move up and down.
And I think you did very, very well. So this is again, we're talking about personal stylistic practices. While performing, I noticed the faces you made during certain parts of the music that had tones or rhythms that stood out. What kind of emotions do you feel while playing these pieces? And I think by faces, this student means expressions, facial expressions. I don't think you were really making faces, but yeah.
Well, that's a beautiful question again. I know that when I play, I tend to make faces when I make mistakes. It's something we're not supposed to do. We're all taught, how to do that. Don't show your cards.
No, but we'll spend the rest of our lives trying to overcome that. Yeah.
But sometimes you can't help it. You're playing along, and you got this really beautiful passage, and then whoop, you shift, and you're short one fret, and the note's completely wrong. You're like, ah. And so if I made any of those kinds of faces, like, oh, sour face, then that was showing me that I probably made a mistake. Sometimes if I laugh or smile, it's probably for the same reason. Whoopsie, I made a mistake. That aside, other faces, I think I'm pretty unconscious of those. They're not something I'm doing intentionally. But I think I'm a person who does has a lot of facial expressions, even when I'm talking, sort of a Jim Carrey thing. Sure. So anyway, I think that comes out when I'm playing. If I'm feeling something, I might have there's a really tender moment in this piece. It's like holding a newborn baby or something. You might have that kind of feeling within you, and so it probably does come out on my face. I try not to, honestly, but I can't sit and just play stone face, which is what people used to do. Andre Segovia, a well-known guitarist in the 20th century, was very good at that. So he had this very stoic, look about him when he played. He didn't make any facial expressions. I can't do that.
Yeah,
I'm not good at that. So anyway, I think my facial expressions aren't intentional. And if they express anything in the music, it's probably just what I'm feeling inside. And I don't know that feeling inside is necessarily the same thing an audience member will feel, though. They may feel something completely different than I feel. I don't think so far off the mark. If I'm feeling, tenderness in a moment, I don't think they're going to feel rage and anger. But as far as the story,
we would hope not.
We would hope not. Unless they're like, man, when's this going to be done? I got to get out of here.
Doubt that.
But anyway, yeah, that's a great question, though. Yeah.
So this is related in the same vein. Out of all the instruments, why the guitar? What makes it special to you?
Yeah, I think the guitar is an incredible instrument, the classical guitar in particular. Why? Because it can do almost everything that any other instrument can do. It has melody, it has harmony, and we have rhythm, and so we have all of the essential things similar to what a piano can do, for instance. It doesn't. You can't play as many notes as you can on piano, and it's not quite as loud. But we can do things with color, so we can change the sound color by how we pluck the string. So we have the ability to produce a pretty wide range of expressions on the instrument, and so I think that really draws me into it. It's a very expressive instrument in ways that are different than piano or even violin or cello, where you can really draw notes out. One thing we cannot do on classical guitar is we cannot create a crescendo with a single note. So when we play a note, as soon as we play it, it begins to die. You cannot swell the sound on it like you can on a cello or violin. Wah. Piano is kind of the same, but with a sustain pedal, it at least can ring for quite a long time, whereas guitar doesn't have that sustaining ability. And so that's kind of back to an earlier question. That's what I try to produce on the guitar, is a singing quality. But as far as the instrument goes, I just think a classical guitar is very primitive in what it can do, but in that very primitive, earthy quality. It has this extraordinary beauty that I really, really love. And I'm drawn to that sound. I think the range is also something that is very attractive to me. It has enough depth in the low end that you feel, some of these powerful notes moving you, physically stirring you. And then we've got enough stuff on the high end to reach up into a nice higher range. It's actually very similar to a cello. We're only basically 2 notes away. The cello's lowest note is a C, ours is up to an E in a normal tuning. And so our ranges are very similar, and I've always been attracted to cello too. And so there might be something about the range that is attractive for me. I did play violin for a while, and I actually never liked playing with the sound of it. Strangely, I didn't find it to be quite as hard to play as what some people say. I found, but I could already play guitar at that point. But so the bowing wasn't that hard for me to figure out, and nor was the intonation in the left hand. But I really didn't love the sound. It was too shrill, too kind of high pitched and thin, and I liked a more sound with more body.
Sure.
So I think that's what attracted me.
Okay. All right. Excellent answers. So I love this question. It probably goes without saying that the guitar is your instrument of choice. Did you choose it, or was it what you were naturally best at?
I chose it because I'm a terrible piano player. So my poor piano teachers, they're like, oh. So, but honestly, I don't love the sound of a piano. And so that's not something that really attracts me. I can appreciate people like you who can really play, and I love to hear that and go, oh wow, that's amazing. You know, that does impress me. But the actual sound of the instrument doesn't move me that much, strangely. So I think for me, I chose the instrument, and I've had an opportunity to play other instruments. I did take piano lessons, I played violin, I sang, I still do sing, but none of those things, strangely, like really drew me in like a guitar does. I don't know why. I'm not completely sure why the guitar is the thing that is attractive to me, but I love the sound of it. I love the aesthetic, the shape of it. I think it's very beautiful, and classical guitar in particular. Electric guitars are a little different thing, but so yeah, I'm attracted to it in so many ways. So I don't think, well, maybe it chose me, but I certainly selected it out of other instruments, not based on what I'm good at. I'm not good at any of the others. So I guess that's part of natural selection, but I just really put all my energy into guitar.
Okay. Yeah, well. So, this next set of questions deals with your specific playing style and execution of your performance. And I'm going to ask these questions, and I may interject a question of my own based upon your answers. So, I have never seen someone hold a guitar like that, and it is very cool and interesting. What caused you to play in that style? And of course, they're talking about how you held the instrument as you played.
Yeah, it's a good question. It has to do with ergonomics, actually, and part of it was just taught to me. So when I first started playing classical guitar, I was told, well, you hold it like this, and you prop your foot up on the footrest, and so on. And so I did what I was told at first. But at some point in time, as a teacher, you have to be able to explain why you do this. And so when I started to really look into it, I started to formulate some reasons for why I do what I do, and I think they're very sound. And I actually teach these things in my class, but essentially, when we're playing the instrument, we have a plucking hand and we have a fretting hand. And if the strings are going in a straight line, they don't curve like so. We have to somehow put these two together. And so, what's the most natural way to do this? When you think about it, if you just kind of close your hands like so, bring your arms around you in this way, other than being straight together, straight up and down, which is actually not that easy to do, like this, if you were to draw a straight line between them, it's a 45-degree angle. And so that's how I hold the guitar. It's like this 45 degree, that's the strings or the neck angles, like so. And then when you put your hands around it, it's centered.
Okay.
So you're bringing it into the center of your body, and you're playing where this hand and this hand are basically doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And anytime you move away from that 45-degree angle, especially because the guitar has a body, it starts to push up this way, and so you end up, if you hold it like many steel string players do, they'll hold it on the other leg, and they'll play like this.
Oh wow! I never really thought about it that way.
Yeah, so they're holding
Wow.
it on the opposite leg, and then what I teach in the class too is if you're sitting straight, you can't play like that very well without making your two arms unequal or uneven.
Yeah.
And then people often turn into the instrument, so then now you've got bad posture along with it. So it's posture, it's hand position. It has nothing to do with aesthetic, what looks cool.
Okay.
Because if that were the case, then I'd probably do like Slash from Guns N' Roses. I'd put a strap, I'd stand with my legs apart, and I'd thrash away. Because that looks cooler than sitting there.
Well, I thought it was really interesting that the student caught that and thought
absolutely.
that was cool. So this next
Yeah.
question is very much related to that. With some of the performances you did, especially Verano Porteño by Piazzolla, does a guitar pick get in the way of delivering the specific music or feeling you are performing, since this musical piece consisted of a lot of picking rather than strumming?
The first part of that question, does the guitar get in the way? Absolutely. The guitar
The
is
pick?
No, the instrument is the obstacle.
Okay. Wow, okay. Cool.
For me, that's what our technique is trying to overcome the limitations and the difficulties of the instrument to express what you really want to do. And so, yeah, the instrument is absolutely the obstacle here. That gets in the way. And so what I'm always trying to do is to find a way to make the piece of music say what I want to say, and with my limited facility, my ability. And a piece like that one, that's a great piece because it's got so many different elements in it. It's got fast strumming, it's got fast picking, it's got lyrical stuff in it, and some really awkward chords that I try to you could say the word spank, because it's sort of what it sounds like, a very fast plucked style where the notes are very short and staccato. So chop, chop, chop on chords, followed by a bass that's moving up.
Sure.
And all of that is supposed to emulate a tango feel. So when people are dancing this tango and they have these kind of sudden movements, and then coupled with some very lyrical and beautiful movements. So as far as how to achieve that, oh man, the instrument totally gets in the way of me being able to do what I'd like to do. And that's a piece that requires more practice from my perspective. It was one that I like most of the program, I basically only spent about a week preparing, and I should have spent a lot more time because it's a much harder piece than maybe it sounds like.
Yeah, but okay. I'm going to ask this next question, and then I'm going to probably interject my own, again, based upon your answers. I ask this since I noticed you are not using a guitar pick, and wondered if there was a specific reason for this. Did the original artist compose the music this way? Was it out of convenience or personal preference? And again, this person is asking based upon the previous piece we were discussing.
Mm-hmm.
So they want to know, why didn't you use a pick?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't use a plectrum at all anymore, a guitar pick, because a guitar pick is really only capable of doing one thing at a time. So I can either play a single string with that plectrum, or I can rake it across several strings. Now you can do that really quickly, so you can go in opposite direction, alternate picking they call it, or fast strumming or whatever. But what you cannot do with the guitar pick is you cannot play the low string and the high string at the same time. You can do them in fairly rapid succession, but with your fingers, I now have 5 guitar picks instead of 1. And so I look at it this way, like I can pick the 6th string and the 1st string simultaneously. And in between I can play other things.
Right.
So really what this all boils down to is there are and have been for centuries 2 styles of guitar playing. And this dates way back into some theory treatises for guitars and plucked string instruments going back into the 1500s. They described a vihuela, which is a kind of a Spanish version of a lute back in the 1500s. And they said that there were 2 styles of playing: vihuela de mano, which was with the fingers, and then the other style, which was a plucked style. And so
Mano meaning the
hands.
Okay.
Yeah. And so the finger style vihuela playing, which is plucked string instrument like a guitar, the finger style music is always more sophisticated than the plectrum style playing. And the plectrum style playing is basically strumming chords and doing rhythms, and so you're really an accompanist at that
Sure,
point,
sure.
which is pretty much what most rock and acoustic players will do, is they're accompanying a singer. So the guitar is really an accompaniment instrument in its role doing that, whereas classical guitar or art music style is, as a solo instrument, we're playing essentially like a piano score. We're playing 2 or 3 or 4 more voices that are all moving simultaneously. And we have to be able to give them different volumes and different sound colors and all that. So that is why I do fingerstyle playing as opposed to plectrum or pick style playing.
Gives you more ability to play more
Multi-
notes.
multiple voices and give each one its own shape and character and sound.
All right. So my question contributed to this deals with the questions that you submitted in this vein, and this is just for my own personal curiosity, but it's based upon a cellist friend of mine, and I asked her why she held the cello in the way that she did, because she bowed it a little differently than I had seen many other cellists. For my observation, is she held it much closer to her body than other cellists I'd seen. And I asked her, why do you do this? And she said for 2 reasons. Number one was her hearing. She was able to hear a little bit better. But the other side of it for her was that her body and the body of the cello were one, and their acoustic properties were one.
Resonating together.
Yeah. And so I wanted to ask you if that had anything to do with the way you held the guitar, the way you play the guitar. Do you feel that it resonates with your body in addition to your surroundings and the acoustics and so forth?
Yeah, absolutely it does. One of the in classical guitar style playing now, most guitarists are moving away from using a footrest. A footrest is just basically any device that props your left foot up 4, 5, 6 inches. So, and what that does is if you're sitting the guitar on your left leg, it just pushes it up into the middle of your torso. And many modern devices on the market now are doing something where they allow you to keep both feet flat on the floor, which is great for our posture. And then they either use some kind of L-shaped device where the guitar sits on suction cups or whatever, and then that sits on your leg. So it's just a little bracket, kind of like a bracket for a cell phone or something like that. But it just holds the instrument up, and so you put the instrument in it, and then that sits on your leg. The thing about those is that I always felt, every single one I've tried, it takes away from the feel that I have with the instrument. It's putting the instrument out here, and I don't feel like I'm resonating with it, like that person said. And so I want to feel the instrument and hear it, and hearing is another part of it. I sometimes lean over the instrument more because I want to hear a certain kind of sound, and so I tend to listen to it that way. And so the footrest allows me to kind of bring the instrument in a little bit more as opposed to having it sit out here.
Sure.
And I like that.
Yeah.
It's kind of maybe for more or less the same two reasons that she said. I want to feel it and resonate with it, and I think it's easier for me to play too. It's more stable.
Sure, having it
And
closer
then-
to your body.
Yeah, and then the sound is, I can hear it better.
Yeah.
So-
Some of the something I'd like to interject here for our viewing audience is, and if you take a guitar class, you will take one of Dr. Roche's guitar classes. You will see this, but they all have wooden boxes.
Yeah.
The footrests
Footrest.
that you're talking about,
Yeah.
which to me was always fascinating, and I never really got it until observing
Yeah.
your class, and that is part of it, being able to elevate that foot.
It brings the instrument up just
yeah.
just a few inches, I mean
Yeah.
4, 5, 6 inches, but it goes from here, and if we play like that, we end up doing, hunching
Sure.
over to play to get our hands in the right spot.
Sure.
Either that or your hands are in the wrong place.
Right.
So
Makes a big difference.
it does, and that style's been around for about 125 or 150 years now, and it started when the instrument achieved its full body size like it is today,
Sure.
back in the mid 1800s.
Sure. Wow. Okay. This next set of questions deals with again performance style, but a little more introspective. And so I'm quoting the student's comment. This performance was absolutely beautiful and moving. I wanted you to hear that from the student. I noticed that you hold your guitar in a unique way while you play. Is this standard for this type of music? For personal comfort, to enable the extremely complex work being done with the fretting hand. And I bring this question because I know it's very similar to the one we just asked, but this person was obviously watching you very closely and watching the recording, and so I felt that her question deserved, or his question, sorry, I can't remember, special attention because they specifically mentioned the fretting hand. So again, we're talking about how you hold the guitar as you play.
And yeah, great observation. When we hold the instrument using that footrest, essentially what happens is we pin the guitar up against our body, and it contacts us in 4 different places: our left leg, our right leg, the center of our chest, and then the forearm here. And so between those, my left hand is completely free to move. So it doesn't have a role in supporting the instrument. And that's
the fret hand.
That's the fretting hand.
Okay.
So it's really important that we find a way to hold the instrument that allows this hand to roam free.
Sure.
And this hand is actually free too, because I'm resting it on the lower bout, the wide part of the guitar, but it's really kind of free to move back and forth and just slide on the instrument. But if we had to hold it in a way that required gripping the guitar to keep it stable in the left hand, it'll completely change our technique and we'll lose our facility then.
Sure.
And so yeah, that part, the fretting hand, it's important that it be completely freed up, and the only way to free it up is to have the instrument be stabilized some other way.
Sure.
So that's how we do it, is we pin it in 4 different places.
Okay.
And then, as far as the person feeling that the performance was emotional or beautiful, that's our goal always as performers, is to take this incredible music that someone wrote. And I didn't write any of these pieces. These are all compositions of other people that I'm playing. But to try to interpret those dots on a page and create musical meaning out of them. And there's, as you know, this is why we have to achieve doctorates in this field, to fully understand this material. There's so much that goes into it. It's not just knowing, oh, it's this kind of chord, or Bach was born in 1685. All those things play a role, but it's really trying to take all those notes and put them together in meaningful ways, one that we understand. For say, oh, that's a melody that begins here, it goes through an ascent, and it comes down here, and it cadences at this point.
Yeah.
To understand the harmonies behind it and so on, but then to express it in a way that we think people will feel meaning from it. And so, can I do that? And believe me, sometimes there's a lot of extra musical narrative that goes with a piece of music. For instance, I'm currently working on the cello suites by Bach. And when you look at it on the page, it looks simple. Ba-da-dee-da-dee-da-dee-da, ba-da-dee-da. It's not very hard. But when you start looking at that music more deeply and you look at other Bach compositions, you start seeing some correlations and say, wow, why did he choose this key? In cello, it's the key of G major. We played in D on guitar. But why did he choose that key? Why did he use that little arpeggio figure in the beginning? And why did he have 42 measures in this piece of music? And there's reasons for all of this.
There is. Yes, there is.
And if you don't mind, I'll take 2 seconds and tell you. But Bach was very much into numerology, for instance.
He was.
And it was a kind of a thing at that time that many educated people were interested in. But Bach's name, if you took the letters of his name and you looked at the alphabet, B is 2, A is 1, C is 3, that's 6, and then H is 7. So, 8, 6 plus 8, 14, 14. So when you take the sum total, 14, and you multiply it times the Holy Trinity, 3, you have 42.
Yes.
It's not a mistake that there are 42 measures in that piece.
It was planned.
It was planned. And there are many other things to it. But there's other things. For instance, the key that he chose, that arpeggio figure, and other he's used these in other chorales and cantatas, where I think a lot of that has to do with the nativity, the birth of Christ. And so I think that first cello suite has an extra musical narrative that has to do with the birth of Christ.
Wow.
And
I've never heard that correlation. That's really fascinating.
Oh, and
especially this time of year.
Right. And the second one in this very somber minor mode, I think is in the Garden at Gethsemane when Christ is alone.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, there's so many things.
It is, yeah. There's a lot of imagery and symbolism that we never think about. Well, the average person does not think about these, but as you alluded to before, you and I sort of, we have to, if we're going to give the composition the attention that it deserves and convey the message that was intended for it to be, presented. We have to do this. We have to study this. That's why we get our doctorates. I mean, it's
right. Yeah, and that's just the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't stop there.
Yeah, right. That's just the one of the steps along the way.
No.
But I think that again, that if it was emotional and meaningful to people, which I'm glad it was to at least one person, we are trying to make it that way so that you feel something when you hear this music.
Yeah.
It's not just a simple entertainment. I mean, I did that. Had I not ever played rock and roll, I wouldn't know the difference. But I played even complex rock tunes, and it's just a whole different thing when you subtract words out of the equation in particular and you're playing instrumental music. How do you move people with that? But let me say one last thing about this, because I know my answers are very long-winded.
No.
But I found this out now, not very long ago, a handful of years ago, and it fascinated me. But humans have used sound as a means of communication longer than we've used words.
Yeah.
Our use of sound or music predates language.
Yeah.
And so knowing that music is an innate part of us, a very integral part of us, and that moves us.
Sure.
It's not as specific as words, I would say that, but I think it has a very deep power to move people in many ways, and I think we're only starting to discover some of that maybe. So anyway.
Yeah, wow, fantastic. Okay, so now we're getting into more about you and your history, and in specific your personal music education history. When did you start playing the guitar, and what caused you to choose this style or theme of music? Now, again, I know you alluded to some of that earlier, but let's talk about when you first started.
Yeah, first started, I wasn't dying to have an instrument. I wasn't begging my parents for it. I can still remember though, 5 or 6 years old, my mother walked me up to this little shop I still remember walking to the shop, and that's one of my earliest memories actually, and ordering this guitar, and then coming back sometime later and getting the guitar, and it was a little Harmony Stella steel string acoustic guitar. But for some reason that stuck in my memory, and then afterward there were guitar lessons, and so that's kind of how it started. But it wasn't like, oh, I had this, it was rapture and like, oh, I need to have a guitar. It wasn't that. It was just like, here you go, here's a guitar. My sisters played piano, my older sisters, and my mother did too. My father sings, and my younger brother plays guitar as well. But so music was part of our household, and it was pretty normal. It was just like, oh yeah, you got to do that, and then you go to school, and I like sports. It was just one of those things. But it became much more later on.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Is there anything you wish you would have done differently regarding your history of teaching or playing music?
Oh, yeah. I would love to go back in time, bringing my knowledge now and start over at age 5.
Wouldn't that be great?
We can't do that, of course. I would do one thing differently. I would have probably gone straight forward into my studies of guitar right when I first entered college. I knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to study guitar, and I loved classical guitar. But you have to understand, at my age, this was before the internet. So, yeah, right? And so information was hard to come by.
Oh, yeah.
We're in a kind of rural area here, and so I remember going to college and digging through this. I mean, there was a wall of, what do they call them, I guess, catalogs, college catalogs from all the different schools around the country or around the world. And so I would just pull them out and look at them like, is there a guitar program? Most of them didn't even list it. They just said instrumental studies or whatever.
There was no Rate My Professor.
Or any of that stuff,
yeah.
right? So studying guitar was really hard to do because there was no one around that taught, at the collegiate level anyway, very few people. And so it was darn hard to figure out. And so if I could go back in time, I would just tell myself, go into studying classical guitar. I probably would have switched schools and started at a different school. I would have ended the same place at Eastman. There was a beautiful education there. But I would have started somewhere where I could have gone and studied guitar. Instead, I studied music theory and composition as an undergrad.
Sure.
So,
to give you a little bit of another take on what Dr. Deroche went through, when we're choosing schools, graduate schools in particular, we do a lot of research to figure out who's there and who we want to study with. And generally, we go to a graduate school because of a specific professor that's there that we really want to study with. I know in my case, I did the same thing. So Eastman is certainly understandable. I love this question. This is my favorite question probably out of the whole bunch. If you could study with any classical guitar player, dead or alive, who would it be?
David Russell.
David Russell. Okay, so
living
Yeah.
guitarist. I've actually had the good fortune of having some lessons with him, but he doesn't teach at any university or conservatory. Unfortunately, he's a touring concert artist, and he does some residencies. He actually does one in Arizona because he loves to golf. And so he lives in Spain, but he and his wife Maria will come over for like 2 weeks out of the year and do an artist in residence thing at this school in Arizona, so he can get.
Is it ASU or is it?
No, it's not ASU. It's the other. What's the other one? Not Arizona State, University of Arizona.
Oh, okay. Tempe.
I think so. That sounds right. Tom Patterson was the professor there. Anyway, Tom worked out a deal where he could bring David Russell in for a week or two every year. And as far as I know, it's the only one that he does. But it's master classes. It's not weekly study, Okay. And that's very different. And that's what I did with him. I've had several master classes where you basically that's a single lesson where you go and you play a piece and he critiques you. Right. He's an incredible teacher. The teacher I had at Eastman, Nicholas Calusis, is magnificent also. And so I had the good fortune of being with him on a weekly basis. And honestly, I still come up with all kinds of questions, and every once in a while I'll call him like, Nick, can you tell me about ornaments in Bach? Because he has so much knowledge.
Sure.
And he's incredible. And David Russell's the same way. And so, I mean, both of those men are extraordinary players. But I've had really some fantastic lessons with people over the years. And so I don't know that I would go back in time and study with anybody, because the guitar is evolving still. It's kind of different than maybe piano. People even in the 18th and 19th century could play keyboard really well.
Sure.
Whereas with guitar, the instrument has changed and the techniques have evolved quite a lot in the last even 50 years. And so most of the players, the great players today, would be unbelievable a century ago.
Sure.
They would have bested, I think, most players, just because of the instrument and the techniques had grown.
Sure.
So anyway, yeah, I'm happy with the people I studied with. I don't know that I would change it.
Is there a past artist that if you could have an hour-long conversation with, who would it be and why?
Probably Julian Bream. He was a British guitarist. He just passed away a couple of years ago. A year. Let's see, was it last year? During COVID, anyway. He was 85 or something. But he had an incredible career. He's one of the greatest players in the history of the instrument. And what Bream did, he was at the forefront in the 1950s of the period instrument revival. And so he was playing lute when nobody was playing lute. And he brought out music by John Dowland and many other ancient music composers who had been largely forgotten. And so he's repopularized a number of those. Plus he had a number of great modern pieces written for him by Benjamin Britten and others. And so he went into a direction that was very different than Andres Segovia, who was the most important player in the first half of the 20th century in guitar. And Segovia had many works written for guitar, but they were usually by very romantic style composers, stuff that he wanted to play. And so he avoided people like Benjamin Britten, who were more modern. And Bream went right down that path, and he commissioned all these incredible modern works for guitar. And so he kind of pulled it out of that. Guitarists are like on an island in the music world, because we often play this sort of ancient repertoire. It's very tonal and pretty and all of that, but we don't often dig into the really tough stuff, the atonal works, the technically demanding stuff. And Bream was the guy that kind of brought us into that world. And so I would like to have a nice conversation with him over a good pint of beer. And I don't smoke cigarettes anymore, but he loved to smoke, so beer and cigarettes with Julian Bream would be great.
In an ideal world.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Okay, so here are some, these questions deal with personal reflections. And I always try to include these questions with each of my guests, but what is your favorite piece that you played on this recital, and why would it be your favorite?
Good question. I would say I would go with one or two pieces, either Capriccio Árabe by Francisco Targa or Julia Florida by Agustin Vargas. And why? Because those are the two most beautiful pieces on the program. I think the Julia Florida piece is one of the most beautiful pieces in the repertoire. And that was actually, I think, the first time I've ever played that in public. I've never played that piece before. And but one of my students is working on it right now, and so I've had the score out because he was working on it, and so I thought, I should play this piece. And it's just so lovely. I mean, it's just beautiful. That's all there is to it. I mean, it's like when you look at a Rembrandt painting, and you look at it and you're like, it's just beautiful. There's something about it that's just beautiful.
Okay, so the reference to Rembrandt, again, this is why I jam things together like I do. You were asked to watch Othello and compare Othello to Dr. Deroche's performance, and then way back when we were looking at some artwork and asked to compare the artwork to some Renaissance motets. So here we are.
Yeah. Speaking of Renaissance.
Yeah. So This question is very, I think, introspective and perhaps psychological. But how do you feel your view of the world has changed because of music? And of course, I know that's a broad.
Let's see how much. That's a profound question, and very important one. I think when I look at what happened in my own life, when I left behind my rock and roll world and started playing art music, everything in my world got better. And I'm not trying to down rock and roll because it has its place, and but there's something very different when you think about what, and this is what was on my mind when I told you I was going to eventually leave that world. I knew that the people I was surrounding myself with, the things that I was doing at that point in time, were things that weren't good or healthy or wholesome. And I'm not trying to sound like I'm holier than thou, because I'm certainly not. But I knew that I was going down a path that was not going to be either good for me or for anybody else in the world.
Sure.
Because you're playing in pubs to drunk people until 2 a.m, and the stuff that goes on there, people are getting in fights, and they're all this kind of stuff. It's like you're exposing yourself to the underbelly of society, and you put yourself there on purpose.
Sure.
And I knew that, and that's where that music fits. It's where it came from, and it's kind of all bound up in that kind of world. Art music, to me, exists in an ideal world where you think of what is the greatest gift we could give, and take Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the brotherhood of all mankind, and in that beautiful ode to joy in the Schiller poem. And I think for me, what changed was as I started getting into this music, and I started to see that it had a different kind of effect on people than the rock and roll I was playing. I started to develop what I thought was a vision of beauty. And so what I want to do with music is to provide a moment of beauty, and I know it's temporal and it's not going to last, but to provide a moment of beauty for people who are there. Because when that happens, I've never played a classical music or art music concert where people were fighting and mad at each other. But I can tell you that happened a lot when I played in bars, in rock and roll. And so that, I don't know if it's just because of the music, but it had a different impact on people. Mm-hmm. And so my friend and I used to muse about this. This tells you how old it is. We were talking about this many, many years ago, decades ago now, but we said, what if Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev, president of the US at the time and Russian president, before they sat down and talked about policy or whatever, blowing each other up 15 times over with atomic bombs, what if first they sat down and played a classical guitar duet, no words, just classical guitar duet? They would have to learn to get along, because they would have to be able to work with the other person and respect the other person's dynamics and all this stuff. It's a thing of beauty. It
is transcending and transcending boundaries of all kinds.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That too. That's a really great part of this, is that when you start really getting interested in art music, you become interested in people for their culture, instead of like in a capitalist way where you're trying to exploit them for whatever they're worth.
Agreed.
Agreed. And this is very different than like maybe Taylor Swift doesn't see herself in this way, but basically the fact that she put out an album for 2 weeks that's one color and then puts out the same thing 2 weeks later that's a different color is basically to exploit people for how much money she can get out of them. Sure. And she may not be in charge of that, maybe somebody else thought of that, but the whole idea behind that is that it's basically an exploitation. Whereas I feel like with art music, at least ideally, it deals with something very different, more profound and more beautiful.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. Deroche has been gracious enough to not only appear on our podcast, the last episode, but he has indeed brought his instrument with him. So we're going to have him play a piece so that you can get a chance to not only experience him semi-live,
Right.
but that you can see that it's not something that is always staged, and something that is art, as we have discussed in my lectures. The visual arts, as I call them, you all know from my own take on it, the performing arts are very much a visual art. So this visual component is something that I would like for them to see. So this is a real treat. We've in our podcast series before, we've had some live music going on, and we've done some cutaways where we go to, we refer back to a performance portion of the performance that the students have already watched. But this is a real treat to be able to have somebody
Cool.
play live. So thank you very much.
Of course.
What are you going to play for us?
I have a really beautiful short piece by Francisco Targa. It's called Lagrima. And Lagrima is tears. And Targa wrote this piece on one of his few tours that he did in his life. He was in London and away from his family, and it was apparently not feeling happy. It was melancholy and sad, and so apparently one of the people there said, "Well, why don't you write a piece about that?" And supposedly this is what he wrote.
Awesome.
And so I'll just play, and then afterward we can talk if we want. Lagrima by Francisco Targa.
Wow.
Thank you.
Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. This is again a personal reflection as I was in attendance at your recital. You mentioned one of the pieces, and sadly I can't recall what the title of the piece was, but you mentioned that it was originally written for piano.
Okay.
As a pianist, I know what it takes. Well, some of what it takes to be expressive and to play well enough to convey that expression. But this again is a personal observation. I was absolutely captivated and astounded at the expression that you gave. I was like, because I could tell from the sound that it was pianistic. Even though it was being performed by a guitar, I was like, yeah, that's exactly how I would have articulated it.
Oh, great.
So I wanted to ask you how you achieved that sense of, my vocabulary is failing. And it's not musicianship; it's expression and sensibility with the instrument.
Same way you did with yours. I mean, it's study. It's experience. You have to, I mean, I don't know if music is so innate that we just feel it, because I had that experience where when I started with this type of music, I would play it based on what I felt, like, oh, this feels good to do it this way. And I would go back later and listen to that and think, wow, that really isn't very good, because I wasn't really hearing the beginning and the end of the phrase, for instance. And so then the study comes in, and so it's your knowledge of music and how music is constructed that together with your sense of emotion and feeling that I think get coupled together and gives you a certain result. But I think the articulation and the way that you do things, I mean, it's what you hear in your head. It's that ideal, like, oh, I want to have this part really sing. I want to achieve that in playing, and how do I do it? So then I have to try to make this upper voice here sing.
Right.
And so that's very different than...
Yes.
And so when I'm playing, I think sing an upper voice. The bass voice here has to support it, but it can't be too loud.
Right.
And then there's an inner voice that's, to me, it's an inner voice, and it's a rhythmic harmonic filler.
Sure.
It's not the main idea. It doesn't say any of this on the piece of music, though. It's just notes.
Right.
And so you have to look at that and say, that's the tune, this is a bass part, that's the inner voice, the harmony. And so you have to find a way to understand that, and that comes from the study and your knowledge of music. But then when you're playing it, what you're trying to direct it to, like a conductor would, as you know, how do I get this kind of sound? And then that's where your technique comes in. So in order to achieve this kind of lyrical sound on the first string, I'm going to kind of move parallel to the string instead of straight across, and that gives me a more lyrical legato sound. But then also, when it comes to phrasing, I'm using rubato. I'm speeding up and slowing down. So I start out a little slower and move faster through the phrase, and it doesn't say to do that either. If I didn't do that, if I didn't do any of those extra things, it would sound like this. Sorry, wrong note step. Not horrible.
No,
But
lackluster.
lackluster, not that interesting versus. And to me, those are tears of joy.
Sure.
That's a beautiful moment, and for whatever reason, it reminds me of my youngest daughter when she was really little. And probably I was learning the piece at that time, so there's a correlation. And so I can kind of see her as a young child when I play this piece. It has that kind of juvenile quality to it. And so on.
Well, thank you for giving us that
Absolutely.
very forensic demonstration. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, we don't think about it when you go to a concert, when you go to a recital. You're not always mindful of the work that goes in or the thought that goes in behind the performance, and there's just so much to it. It's so much more than, as you said, notes on the paper. You really have to interpret.
Oh, yeah.
And as this has been just an eye opener for me to hear the difference, and I've demonstrated this to my own piano students at times, but how you finger the strings is equally as important as the rhythm and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes a difference. It really does.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
tremendous. It's absolutely tremendous. Brad, I can't thank you enough
Thank you.
for being on the show.
Thanks to you.
Yes, thank you for the wonderful
Great
questions. I always allow my guests to take us out on the final thought. So anything you would like to say to the students before we close?
Oh, well, first off, thank you. Really wonderful questions. Thanks for tuning in. This is really a treat for me to be able to talk about myself. It's the thing I do best. But I'm glad that you're interested in the humanities. I believe that our world is kind of pushing itself away from the humanities more and more toward the hard sciences. And those things are wonderful too. We need that. But we also need humanities. These are things that make us human. So it usually doesn't cost a lot to go to art music concerts or to go to museums and so on. But I've found, or live plays, it should be live too. Those are the important ones. Live music performances. Those are the things that, for me anyway, have stuck with me most in my life. Listening to a CD, watching a movie, those things, they're important, but they don't stick with me. They don't become like a real permanent part of my being. Whereas live performances and real human interaction in the humanities, those things stick with me.
Sure.
And they become a part of you then.
Sure, yeah.
And so I would encourage you to continue to go to concerts and art museums and so on and explore the humanities. I mean, it makes life really rich.
It does.
Yep.
Indeed it does.
Thank you.
Well, thank you again, Dr. Brad Deroche. Absolutely wonderful experience for us. And ladies and gentlemen, I wish you all a very wonderful Christmas and holiday break. And as always, if you've enjoyed our program, please hit like, please hit subscribe, and we'll see you later. Bye.
Thank you.
Love makes me treat you the way that I do. Gee, baby, ain't I good to you? There's nothing too good for a girl that's so true. Gee, baby, ain't I good to you? I bought you a fur coat for Christmas, a diamond ring, a Cadillac car, and everything. Love makes me treat you the way that I do.